Do you believe in speaking in tongues today? That is a good lead pastor question for Chad to answer.
So the answer is yes. I do believe that, because the question is, do you believe? Let me explain tongues, because it's several different options here. One part of speaking in tongues is when somebody is trying to share Jesus with somebody else, and the two people speak a different language. And so in Acts chapter 2, they're preaching Jesus, and everybody's hearing the gospel in their own language. And so it's a supernatural thing. It would be like, I don't speak Spanish, but I'm trying to share the gospel with somebody that does. And so as I'm talking, they're hearing it in Spanish. And so I think you've experienced that in some of your mission trips.
Specifically, yeah, in Spanish, presenting the gospel. When I was a junior hire, I was doing these little magic shows to draw a crowd, and then a translator, somebody would present the gospel, and I started talking as I was doing that, and I'm like, I'm actually explaining the gospel decently, and kids responded and said yes to following Jesus, and I walked away going, man, I got like a C in Spanish class at high school or whatever. Like, this is amazing what was happening here, and so I think God spoke through me in that moment.
You were speaking Spanish better than you're capable of speaking Spanish.
That's 100% accurate, yes.
Yeah, so that is one type of speaking in tongues. Another type would be like in a worship service, where somebody speaks in a language that nobody understands, and then the Bible talks about that in a couple of places, and there would need to be an interpreter that makes sense of that. And then the third type of speaking in tongues would be what I would call a private prayer language. And it would be where the Holy Spirit takes over, and you're speaking a heavenly language, is how the Bible calls it. But you can tell it's the flow of the Holy Spirit in you and through you. And the reason that happens privately is to build up a believer. It's like a personal connection with God to encourage you. The Bible word is to edify you. And so do you have 1 Corinthians 14 there? I'll let Robert read the passage. But do I believe in the gifts of the Spirit in the realm of tongues today? Yes, I do.
Yeah, so in 1 Corinthians, if you want to read 1 Corinthians 13, 14, talks about different gifts of the Spirit. And in 14, verse 1, it says this: follow the way of love and eagerly desire gifts of the Spirit, especially prophecy. Anyone who speaks in a tongue does not speak to people, but to God. Indeed, no one understands them. They utter mysteries by the Spirit, that's capital S, Holy Spirit. But the one who prophesies speaks to people for their strengthening, encouraging, and comfort. And so it goes on to talk about speaking in a tongue versus prophesying. Speaking in a tongue is for edifying the individual. Now, there are cases where there would be somebody, and then somebody would interpret that, and it would be edifying because there was an interpretation. But this is more of a prayer language. Is that available today? Yes, because it happens throughout the Bible. It's talked about throughout the Bible. It's the same Spirit who was in Paul, who was in the early church, is the same Spirit who's within us today. And so all the gifts of the Spirit would be available to us, but not everybody is going to speak in tongues in their prayer language, and that's okay too.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, some traditions, they'll be like, well, if you don't speak in tongues, you don't have the Holy Spirit. That's not what the Bible teaches. I just read a moment ago that when you give your life to Jesus, you receive the Spirit. And the ministry of the Spirit looks different in and through different people's lives. But yes, I believe in the gifts of the Spirit, and he can do whatever he wants to do, which was the question.